Welcome to the Missing Pages, where we explore science and history that you might not find in your average textbook. My name is Kausar, and my co-host Lee and I are scientists, meaning we spend a lot of our time being curious about all kinds of things, and the history of science is no exception.
Our understanding of science is built on thousands of years of knowledge from peoples all across the earth. Yet, we're often taught that scientific knowledge comes from a very limited part of the world. That's why we'll be highlighting science and history from outside of Europe that have been foundational to our understanding of our world today, and have often been left out of the story.
So whether you're a curious mind or a fellow scientist, join us on this journey in uncovering the missing pages.
We're talking about food today, which is actually really complex. There's the science of food. How does it give us energy? How do we produce it, consume it, transport it? There's the social aspects of food. How does it reflect our values and culture? And then there's the human rights aspect to food when we talk about access to it and also malnutrition. Today on the Missing Pages, we are going to learn about food systems that were in place before colonization of Turtle Island, and we'll get to speak with two experts on food in their communities.
Anin bojo pinunene Indigenous cause Balzanashi and Dorem, Mississauga Anishinaabe and Ndao, Pamanash Kodeong and Donjaba. I've worked for many years in indigenous food systems, focusing on food self-reliance as well as what some people like to call food sovereignty or food security. I really do love working with our traditional foods. I grow corn. You can probably see some hanging back there. We grow our traditional corn here in my community. We also forage, which I kind of am not a big fan of the term foraging, because foraging sounds like you're scrounging around looking for things. Whereas the Anishinaabe, my people, the Mississauga are part of the Anishinaabe Confederacy, we kind of built the entire ecosystem to be a food forest, in a sense. A lot of early explorers described walking through the eastern woodlands, whether that was amongst the Ganyageha or the Mohawk, the Lenni Lenape, or also the Delaware sometimes, the Abenaki, or my people, the Anishinaabe, and they would describe the forests as these massive park-like estates, huge forests that have been heavily managed with very little undergrowth except for select plants. And they would describe the forests as these kind of garden-like environments. And some settlers would describe it as like a miracle that God had bestowed upon them, this beautiful forest that provided everything they needed, not realizing that we had spent countless generations making it that way. In a lot of ways, we terraformed North America. I have a garden all around my house that I built myself, and part of it is a patch of what's called sunchokes. Some people call them Jerusalem artichoke. The roots are tubers that are edible. It is an extremely sustainable food source. I didn't get that patch from going to Richter's or Vasey's Seeds or any of these beautiful heirloom food supply places. I went to the trail that goes into my camp because it grows wild just there on my rents. Just in my community, that's the one spot that is growing feral. And it's just been there since time immemorial. So I have the descendants in my garden of what my ancestors propagated and protected and maintained and made this entire landscape into their garden. It's just a massive garden that starts up near Hudson Bay, basically as far north as plants can grow, all the way down to Mexico and all the way out to the East Coast and all the way out to the Midwest. It's a massive garden that our ancestors had in this landscape, and we maintained it. Maybe not in the ways of like clean-cut rows, but that's because clean-cut rows of Europe were done because they had oxen and horses and plows. We had our own 2 feet. And just because we didn't cut down every single tree to grow that garden doesn't mean it's not a garden. In fact, in modern day, they would call it a food forest.
So most folks think about agriculture in a rural context, but it's actually possible to grow food in an urban setting, and it actually has a lot of amazing benefits for communities. So a better food system that minimizes what's broken and farming practice that can actually reverse detrimental effects of intensive industrial farming and or climate change and or urban water runoff. This is really at the heart of the benefits of urban farms. So even on an urban farm, it might not be the same parallels exactly to a large rural farm environment, but the same benefits hold in terms of being a CO2 sink and a sponge basically for the city, so that you can actually capture some of that rainfall and do something good with it. So research continues to reveal that the damaging effects of soil from tillage, applications of agricultural chemicals and salt-based fertilizers and carbon mining really have shown that perhaps this intensive industrial agricultural model isn't quite the way to go. The loss of the world's fertile soil and biodiversity is actually one of the biggest ecological crises of our times. And also that goes along with the loss of Indigenous seeds and knowledge, as this poses a threat to our future survival.
There's a lot of different ways that we could take care of the landscape to make it into better agriculture for ourselves in a sustainable way. First is your location, just like real estate, location. So floodplains, prairies, plains, ecosystems, or open forest areas that we've already burned back. And we would choose those locations for those reasons because it was open for growing. Beyond that, we would then amend the soil when we needed to. And that would be done with things like charcoal, pottery or potsherds, rotted wood, and of course, fish and other animal carcasses that are not being consumed. Beyond that, it was mostly upkeep, managing and taking care of those plants as we go. The raspberry bushes, the currant bushes, and propagating them and letting them get bigger and expanding. And then from there, just making sure everything's being taken care of and protected. A lot of Western garden systems require you to tear down everything and build a monoculture. And that's just not really how the landscape works. And if you talk to anyone that works in permaculture, they'll tell you that before anything else, that you cannot have a monoculture. Permaculture requires multiple plants of multiple species with a lot of different variety happening and working kind of not necessarily like hand in hand. A lot of people like to think of it like companion planting. There's a lot of myth around companion planting, like the whole corn, beans, and squash. The three sisters take care of each other perfectly. If that was the case, the Haudenosaunee wouldn't abandon their villages after 30 years because the soil's gone dry. They wouldn't have to constantly replenish it with fish, because if it was perfectly in sequence, then beans would create enough nitrogen in the soil to take care of the corn. That's just not the case. Corn takes a lot of nitrogen. And so we've managed our landscape with certain things of as close to permanent soil amendments as possible. You can see that in the Terra Preta down in the Amazon. The Terra Preta is this massive swath of the Amazon River where the ground is black, even though it's a clay-rich soil all through the jungle. The Amazon rainforest has actually some of the worst soil in the world to grow food in. And that's why modern-day farmers down there are doing slash and burn tactics. They cut down as much stuff as they can, burn it to ash, spread that ash around to fix potassium and phosphorus in the soil, and then they grow their crops until the crops wilt, and then they move over to another spot and do it again. And it's not very sustainable. Anishinaabe and those folks who lived on the Terra Preta in the Amazon knew to use charcoal instead of ash. You burn your wood to a certain point and then bury it. And that wood, that charred wood, well, there's a reason we use charcoal in hospitals to absorb things that have been put into somebody's stomach from either an overdose or they accidentally poison themselves, whatever it may be. That sucks up, because this is where it gets really weird. Scientifically, mathematically, it breaks your brain a little bit. But 1 cubic centimeter of charcoal, pure charcoal, holds 500 square feet of surface area. The beans can't do it themselves. We have to fertilize the soil, but it will last very long periods before you have to do anything like letting the field go fallow or whatever other Western European style farming methods require, is letting those fields go fallow or change their crops every year. We don't have to change our crops. All our crops go in at once, and they're all growing in not necessarily a symbiotic relationship, but a beneficial relationship where they're all getting what they need. And also, this is like this time of year, we call this Zigwan in our language. It's talking about, some people say like Zigwan means spring, but it doesn't actually mean like all of spring. It means specifically this time of year when the roots are sucking up that sap and drawing it up into the tree's trunk and branches. That's what it's talking about, Zigwan. And this is the closest thing we have in Anishinaabe culture to New Year's. This is like our New Year's. Way back in the old days, it was a community event thing. The community worked together. And we're talking like pre-contact to early post-contact times. Beyond that, you're dealing with family units who are kept together and they couldn't travel very far because of reserve system, property lines, land loss, all that kind of obvious reasons. And so a family would run a sugar bush. All that's well and good. Like, yeah, industry and economy and being able to make a living at stuff, sure, that's all great. But it's the tradition of keeping it going and keeping those teachings alive, remembering Wenonebojo and Inanautic and all those beings that created that sugar bush for us to live in and thrive in. Like maple syrup was a very common thing with the settlers. Maple syrup because they had glass jars and bottles that they could put it all in. Anishinaabe, we made sugar because it was stable, it was shelf stable, but also if you dumped a jar or dumped a basket over, it didn't just melt into the soil. You could actually kind of scrape it up and try to get your sugar back. And often it came in blocks. We would make cake sugar out of it. And this main part of sugar was beneficial health-wise because it's got a lot of chemical compounds in it that are benefiting you from necessarily having too much of a sugar spike and then an insulin spike and then a sugar crash, which if you keep doing, eventually your body becomes tolerant to that and you start developing diabetes. That's what happens when we consume white sugar and cane sugar and even molasses and all that stuff. Whereas maple sugar has up to 17 chemical compounds that negate that and cause it to be more of an arc over a longer period. It burns for like 7 to 12 hours, depending on your metabolism. Anishinaabe have had sweet tea since time immemorial, but we didn't have a word for diabetes until the mid-1950s. We also use it as a medicine. There's certain chemical medicines that we make out of plants through extractive processes of boiling it down for long periods. Some of these sometimes have 90 to 150 species of plants in the medicine, and it is boiled down until it's basically a tar, and it's called escagomdek. And so maple sugar and maple syrup have been used to make medicines for generations, tens of generations, hundreds of generations. Beyond that, it's a trade good. A single Anishinaabe household could produce 200 to 250 pounds of maple sugar in a single season. No one I know eats 250 pounds of sugar in their entire year. A lot of that is surplus, and that surplus is traded. And we would make birch bark cones that look kind of like a hand roll from a sushi restaurant, made of birch bark, and it would be stitched together, and then a string would be threaded through the funnel end, the narrow end. And then we would make a knot, and that would become a plug. And we would tilt those up and set them into the snow or set them into wooden holes, and then we'd pour molten sugar into every single one of those. And the sugar sets and firms up into cake sugar, and now it's able to be carried by that string, looking like a bell. And they were each approximately 1.2 pounds. So now we have a currency that is easily standardized. And we know that maple sugar was traded as far south as the American Southwest from the Ganaraska region of Ontario. So maple sugar was a currency. It wasn't just a food, it wasn't just a medicine, it was also our economy. I argue that before the Beaver Wars, sugar was what we all traded for, not fur. Fur became the primary when the English and the French and the Dutch showed up.
Are you craving pancakes and maple syrup? Because I know I am. Harvesting maple sugar has taken many forms over the millennia, from being used as a medicine to being traded as a currency and producing delicious maple syrup. But now there's something else that's causing changes in sugar bushes and harvesting.
So I've seen a lot of things change in the woods due to climate change. Harsher weather. Beyond that, we're seeing fluctuations in productivity. I've seen a lot of big shifts. I'm very concerned. I'm very worried. I'm very frustrated because we've been noticing this in sugar bushes for decades now. I knew of it when I was growing up. I heard people say like, oh, this is a bad year because of this climate change stuff from global warming, whatever else that they're calling it at that time. And it wasn't until my mid-20s that I started going, oh damn, this is a real problem. This is actually like in my lifetime happening. and I can't revert it. I can't reverse it. I can't stop it. We may be tapping in January by 2025, and we may only be able to run for 2 weeks, and that'll be the only season we have from now. People further north than us, up in Halliburton and the Muskokas, sure, they'll have probably the same kind of seasons they've had for years, but it's coming their way too. It's going to change soon for them. I have no doubt in my mind, and that really scares me.
We know that climate change is driven by increases in CO2 in the atmosphere. However, by following regenerative farming practices in urban settings, these urban farms can then actually reverse this and act as carbon sinks. And not only act as carbon sinks, but actually even go beyond where they're cleaning the air.
We know that climate change is a huge issue. The effect on maple sugar production is just one example of how climate change affects our daily lives. However, sustainable agriculture is also part of the climate solutions that we need. Our food systems are affected by a lot more than climate change, though. Our current industrial agricultural systems do not provide sufficient nutrition for billions of people worldwide. So, when we talk about food systems, we need to talk about access to food. We need to talk about community inclusion in our food systems and cultural ties to what we eat. The concepts of food security and food sovereignty are specific to different communities. So both Nicole and Caleb are going to talk a little bit about how their work relates to food security.
At its most basic, food security is actually a matter of having financial resources to feed you and your family healthy, nutritious food. However, it's important to realize that food insecurity is actually a symptom of bigger issues that are related to things like systemic racism and economic inequities and poverty. So it's about reconnecting and deepening our relationship to the land and our traditional foodways. So owning our labor and using it in service to nourishment our own bodies and thriving of our own families and communities. It's about building our institutions that have our best interest at the core and that are led by Black people. Most people, Black folks in the GTA, are descendants of people who were kidnapped from West Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere against their will to work the land in slavery. And our health and well-being historically was never the priority of the European colonialists.
Through food security, working and teaching people as much as I can on traditional foods and showing them sustainable ways to grow it, sustainable ways to harvest it, and gather it or hunt it or trap it and fish it has been at the forefront of my mind, because sustainable has to happen with food security. It's not secure food if you wipe it out. So for non-Indigenous folks that are getting into Indigenous foods, there's a lot of like taking space kind of situations that happen there. Not always, and sometimes it's for the better and sometimes it's for the worse. There's seed saving initiatives and seed sharing initiatives for corn, for beans, for squash, for Gedeo-Kosamin. The first time I ever ate Gedeo-Kosamin, which is an ancient squash of the Anishinaabe people, 800 years plus old variety of squash, pre-contact squash, really good tasting squash. The first time I got to eat it was from a non-native woman who served it to me. And it was a really weird feeling of her pride of growing it herself, paying good money for those seeds and growing it herself and feeding it to me, and almost boasting about how she grew that and telling me the story of how it was lost to the peoples for hundreds of generations. And she was lucky enough to get some of the seed to bring it back and preserve it for us. And I had such a hard time not breaking the news to her that Gedeo-Kosamin has never been extinct. It has never been away from us. The Miami people have been growing it for hundreds of years, and we trade with Miami, we trade with the Meskwaki, who are the other people that were raising and growing Gedeo-Kosamin for the last 800 years. And we lost it only 100 years ago in our communities, and we got it back from them. We didn't get it from her. She didn't save it. But she had this like story in her head that it was found in a clay jar somewhere down. As an archaeologist, I can tell you right now, there's 101 stories of seeds being found in clay jars. None of those stories are true. As much as I would love that story was true, I can tell you right now that if it was, there would be thousands of journals about it. But she had this very gatekeeper attitude when I was talking to her about getting the seeds off her. She goes, well, I got to make sure there's enough for next year to grow and make sure there's enough for everyone to go out and get some more squash. Like, how long have you been growing? Oh, 10 years. I'm like, how many seeds do you have? Oh, thousands. She wouldn't give up the seed. She wouldn't give up 4 or 5 seeds for me to grow it at my place. But she was saving our people's squash. And it gets into this like gatekeeper mentality that is just mind-boggling.
Black food sovereignty is, at the core, it's about self-determination within the community so that we can be in control of our own destiny and our own health, really. And so institutional and structural racism throughout the centuries have denied Black people access to the opportunities and resources to allow them to be food sovereign here in North America. So Black food sovereignty is continuing this legacy of resistance and self-determination that strives to put out Black health at the center. And so it's about the right of African, Caribbean, and Black people of African descent to be able to exercise self-empowerment and gain access to healthy, organic, and culturally appropriate foods. And also to unify and centralize people of African descent around food justice. The work of an urban farm, particularly the Ryerson Urban Farm, and the work that I'm doing there in the role of the Black Food Sovereignty Engagement Coordinator is to actually first and foremost make space for BIPOC people, Black youth, people in the downtown core that may not feel like they belong in those spaces. And it's also about reclaiming knowledge that was once lost. The reason why Black people are here in the diaspora was to work the land. And the reason why they were a targeted people across the West African coastline is because they came with this farming knowledge. One thing that I think is worth noting is how Black and Indigenous people have often been erased or silenced in the stories of these very wise and ancient farming practices. Regenerative agriculture is actually just reclaiming the way Indigenous people all over the world have farmed for millennia.
I told you, food is complex. It nourishes us physically, mentally, and emotionally while connecting us to our community, both past and present. So, what are our science textbooks missing when it comes to our complex food systems?
If I had a chance to participate in writing a textbook for science and STEM in general, focusing on Indigenous food systems and in general food security of the Indigenous peoples, I would first and foremost say that it needs to include the fact that Indigenous people are the authorities on this stuff. As someone who's worked in archaeology for 12 years and has worked in Indigenous environmental studies and ecosystem management for well over a decade, we're the authority. Our facts that people would like to say as anecdotes or native indigenous insights, no, that's scientific fact. We observed, we saw, we theorized, we hypothesized, and it came up to theories, and we confirmed our theories with practice again and again and again and again for well over 12,000 years or more.
Here's what Nicole would add to her missing page about Black food sovereignty.
There's a man named Booker T. Whatley who is actually at the roots of the sustainable agricultural movement, and in particular as a business model, such as pick your own or pay what you pick, those kind of models. That's all part of what Dr. Whatley envisioned with the sustainable agricultural as a business model, so that Black folks could be food sovereign and make sure that their farm could give them economic sovereignty as well. So his focus was on regenerative agriculture and improving the livelihood of farmers through direct marketing, which he called community sustainable agricultural model. And like many contributions of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color that are forgotten or erased in history, the introduction of this community sustainable agricultural model actually began in Alabama in the 1960s. And so Dr. Wadley's incredible innovation and intersection of organic agriculture and social justice is what an urban farm connected to Black food sovereignty is really all about.
You want to see food sovereignty, you want to see Indigenous peoples thriving, they need their land back. Everything gets quickly intertwined. When we talk about food security, food sovereignty, anything like that, it gets quickly intertwined with land back. It has to happen. Indigenous people have to have access to land to grow that food.
Thanks for watching The Missing Pages. We hope this helps to give a more accurate understanding of the history of science and the wide range of peoples who continue to play an important part in our understanding of the world. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media for more content.